And welcome back to Capital City Sunday. I am joined now by attorney Dean Strang. He was one of the two trial attorneys for Stephen Avery in his 2007 trial for the murder of Teresa Halbach. Dean, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I would imagine that this past week or so you've been getting a lot more emails, a lot more calls about this Stephen Avery case than you have in the last 8 years. I mean, has that been the case?
My life since Friday has looked much different than it did the week before that.
What has most of the traffic that you've seen been? I mean, I know I've seen just on Twitter, because people who are watching the documentary, and I think a lot of people, especially who don't know anything about the case, are watching the documentary, are saying, you know, we need to start something to free Stephen Avery. Have you been getting a lot of that?
Well, not on Twitter, because I live in about 1979.
In terms of emails and calls and so forth?
Emails from all over the world.
Really? From all over the world?
Hundreds from all over the world and every corner of the United States.
And if people have seen this, and I do want to say, if people haven't seen it, there are going to be some spoilers in this, so you know we do want to mention that if you're planning on watching the documentary. But I know in the documentary, and I think still to this day, you've always felt there's a strong possibility that Stephen Avery is innocent, or is it more than a strong possibility in your mind?
Well, in my mind, it's not a certainty that he's innocent, but it's very much a lack of certainty that he's guilty.
Right.
And always has been. It still is. I remain really badly troubled by this conviction.
Is it partly, I know we see a lot in the documentary, and I think the documentary, it's safe to say, is a bit slanted in that we see a lot of your deliberations with Jerry Buting, the other defense attorney. We don't see the other side as much in terms of talking to them outside of the courtroom with the prosecution. But is it safe to say it's troubling to you because of so many discrepancies, whether it be evidence, whether it be who is handling the evidence? I know there's a lot of discussion about the fact the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office had too much of a role in this investigation, considering they were the ones who basically railroaded him for the rape conviction in 1985.
Setting aside how someone might characterize it all, those things all play a part for me. But if you're asking me personally, and to draw on my own experience, Stephen Avery and many people like him don't really have the emotional or intellectual resources to withstand the withering pressure of police interrogation and public scrutiny that he went through for a week while Ms. Halbach was missing. People like that who are guilty confess. They just almost always do. Moreover, I think the greater weight of the evidence clearly supports the reality, I think, that that poor young woman's body was not burned outside Stephen Avery's bedroom window. It wasn't burned in his burn pit, but rather the bones were taken and dumped in his pit. If you've killed someone and you're now trying to destroy their body by fire, you don't bring the remains back to your place and dump them outside your bedroom window. So at a personal level, if you're asking me,
back, I guess that's assuming they were brought back there,
and the jury actually believed he was acquitted of that, destroying the body. Yep. And I really do. I'm trying to be objective about it. Right. I think the greater weight of the evidence was that that body was destroyed by fire somewhere else, and the burnt remains dumped, or most of them. There were human bone fragments found in 2 other locations, including a burn barrel, which would have been a better, sort of thermal device. Mm-hmm. But most of the bone fragments were found in the burn pit, and I continue to believe they were probably dumped there, just as an objective matter.
One of the questions that I think gets brought up in the documentary and was brought up at the time of trial was if he didn't do it, who did? And I know that the judge in the case did not allow you or your partner to represent or to present any other alternative theories of the crime. Had you been able to do that, what were some other alternative theories in your mind?
There were a number of other people who were possible suspects, and I'm not going to defame anyone by naming people, but there really were a number of other possible suspects. It's also when you're defending a case, and so you don't have a police force, you don't have search warrant powers, you don't have the powers of the state in general. It can be a seductive trap to try to turn around and, not only negate your client's guilt, but then affirmatively undertake a burden to prove someone else's guilt. And that the system isn't designed to work with the defense carrying an affirmative burden of saying, if not me, then so-and-so. So I don't know that we ever could have or would have done that, but we were hampered in the defense by the legal ruling that forbade us from, raising a number of other people who had the same opportunity, the same motive or, lack of motive as Stephen, and might have supported reasonable doubt about whether the state got the right guy.
And I know you said in your closing argument to the jury that, the state definitely believes Stephen Avery is guilty, and that's why they would try to frame him. You don't try to frame someone who's innocent. If you think they're innocent, you're not going to necessarily.
You've got to be a really evil human being to set out to frame an innocent person. When the police are tempted to augment a case dishonestly, almost always, I think, they're doing it because they really believe the person's guilty and they fear he'll get away.
And do you believe in this case, in your mind, did they frame him in some ways?
You're asking me, personally, and for me, the absolute most troubling indication of that possibility was the Toyota key, discovered in a very small bedroom out in the open, not on the first search, not on the second, not on the third, on the seventh search, without the DNA of the woman who owned that car key, supposedly, for 6 years, but supposedly with the DNA of Stephen Avery. I just remain deeply skeptical of that sequence of events.
The one thing that really jumps out at me is whether he's guilty, whether he's innocent, whether his nephew is guilty or innocent. All of the charges, there was the confession that they took from Brendan Dassey in which they concluded that a sexual assault had taken place in Stephen's trailer, that he and his nephew Brendan were both involved in that. All of those points had no physical evidence, and you got all of that thrown out in Stephen's case, the sexual assault. You said there was no DNA evidence of anything. There was no blood, nothing of hers in his trailer. But yet, even in Ken Kratz's closing argument to the jury, he says that's because she wasn't killed in the bedroom, she was killed in the garage. But when they try Brendan Dassey, he is convicted on all of those sexual assault charges, and they go back to that story of the trailer, now of her assault in the trailer. Now I know you didn't defend Brendan Dassey, but is it ethical? I guess it's obviously legal to use that defense, even though it was disproved in another case.
There's a disappointingly ambiguous body of case law on when prosecutors can advance inconsistent theories of one crime to two juries. I mean, the sort of classic case is a death penalty case where there's one shooter but two defendants, and they're tried separately, and the state tries to obtain the death penalty against each by arguing that each, in turn, was the one trigger man. So in trial A, it's A who fired the bullets, and in trial B, the prosecution shifts its theory to say that it was defendant B.
Right.
Courts, by and large, with some exceptions, have tolerated that as a due process matter. They shouldn't.
It seems on its face for somebody who's not an attorney. And I know there's a lot of things in the law that what they seem on their face are not what they are legally.
But if at bottom my profession is about seeking the truth, then advancing those kinds of factually inconsistent, irreconcilable theories just can't be a service to a search for truth.
Yeah, and I know you didn't represent, again, Brendan Dassey, but the other thing that I think, again, if he's guilty, it's still troubling to me that really no one was looking out for this 16-year-old kid in his defense team. It seems like they were really trying to make sure he confessed to this crime, and even when
well,
he
that's
was
his original defense team, to be
right,
clear.
exactly,
and
exactly.
that team was replaced.
Yeah, and now there is a group that is trying to get him, some relief in federal court to basically throw out that conviction, I guess, or to throw out at least that confession. But does that happen a lot? I mean, you try a lot of these cases, but Stephen had very good defending. Brendan Dassey did not. But do you see that a lot in these cases where someone is poor, maybe not well educated, maybe their IQ is borderline like Brendan Dassey's was, and nobody's really looking out for them?
Your recital of the Dassey case will stand without my comment, and viewers of the documentary will draw their own conclusions. Beyond that case, do human lawyers, often overburdened if they're public defenders or living on appointed work, fall short of the mark we ought to expect? It happens frequently. We are all human, and the system is not well set up to fund the defense side. The public, for some understandable reasons, funds the prosecution side much more generously and attentively than it funds the defense function.
Public defender's side. I want to ask you, we've only got a couple minutes left. A lot of people are saying, what can we do, if Steven Avery's innocent? And again, I think, much like you, I am not certain he's innocent. I'm also, after watching this, not certain he's guilty. But is there really anything? I mean, Ken Kratz made the statement that it doesn't change anything. There's not a lot Steven Avery can do. And it sounds like you probably agree with that.
His legal options are very limited at this point, absent new evidence coming to light. I'm hopeful that the documentary does, cause someone who knows something and has been sitting on a secret for a long time to come forward and say something. It's also possible that scientific advance may serve him at some point. While convictions are static in our system, knowledge in the advance of science are dynamic. And so those are remaining possibilities, but they're slim hopes.
It seems that this case still troubles you to this day. I know you made the comment, and it kind of resonated with me where you said, in some ways, I hope Steven Avery is guilty, because the way this was handled, if he isn't, boy, that's really troubling for our system.
Well, and I carry it. I lost his case. He came to me and to Jerry Buning, and I lost his case. So if I live to be, 97 and a half years old, I'm going to carry this until I'm 97 and a half years old. That's part of the bargain.
Yep.
I'd do it again, and I will do it tomorrow.
All right. Well, Dean Strang, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. It was an incredibly interesting 2015 in state politics. Coming up next, I break it down with Capitol colleagues Mark Sommerhauser of the Wisconsin State Journal and Jesse Opoyan of the Capital Times. We'll also look ahead to 2016. Stay with us.